All right, let's have a look at the morning's papers again. Now we'll bring in the journalist and author Janelle Aldred and the journalist and broadcaster Thomas Copeland, who I'm pleased to say, there they are, big faces in the wall, joining me again. Janelle and Thomas, thanks for being with us. All right, Janelle, let's pick up with you with the front page of The Times. We heard a little bit there from the Minister, Greg Hand, and also from Ashna down in Dover. This is Priti Patel sort of striking back at Archbishop Justin Welby, criticising her plans. I mean, in the American Parliament, she's really doubled down on this policy, hasn't she?
She really has. And in this joint article with the Rwandan foreign minister, she calls the plan, bold. She says they're innovative. They want the first flights to leave next month with a backdated policy to the 1st of January for transporting asylum seekers to Rwanda for them to be processed there and to receive, the news of whether they're successful or not in Rwanda. She says it's surprising that critics like the Archbishop of Canterbury hasn't come up with a better plan. Well, I think most of us will say, well, really, that is her job to come up with the plans and also to have alternative plans. And when they talk about the suffering of asylum seekers, we have to ask, well, why are they suffering when they come to seek asylum here in the UK? What's so bad about them seeking asylum here? They're suffering so much that we need to send them to Rwanda for a better experience. What experience are we giving people seeking asylum? And anyone can seek asylum and can come here and seek it, and then they will be rejected or accepted, and that will make them here legally or illegally. So I think the other thing that the government's doing is they're conflating terms about illegal asylum seekers, and that just muddies the water of public opinion too about whether or not people should be seeking asylum here. And of course, this is what the Archbishop of Canterbury is saying, is that as a Christian country, or a country founded on Christian principles, more should I say, we should be accepting asylum seekers here, and we should be looking after people with compassion when they come and seek asylum. They should be processed here, and then we will know whether or not their claims are legitimate. And I think that he is right for speaking out in a sense where the church is, some people say, losing relevancy. He is speaking up on the issues that cut to the core of human compassion. And the other thing that I failed to see, they talk about stopping traffickers. I don't think traffickers are going to be advertising to people, giving them money that they won't actually be processed here. It's going to be in Rwanda. So I don't see also how this plan stops that. But Priti Patel is doubling down, and I think a lot of people will say that she's very wrong and strong.
OK, thank you, Janelle. All right, let's move on to the front page of the Financial Times if we can now. And Thomas, you picked up the main story there. This is Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the International Monetary Fund, saying that we're facing stagflation as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Tell us more about that.
Well, these are going to be the big economic impacts from the conflict in Ukraine expected over the course of this year. Twin perils, as the Financial Times put it, as slow growth and high inflation, stagflation expected to hit the global economy. IMF says they're expecting to downgrade the forecast from most advanced countries around the world in the coming week, particularly in Europe with its kind of proximity to the conflict in Ukraine. And really, I think that, the reason this is important is because this is the big challenge in terms of, the everyday lives of people in the West. It's going to be the individual economic impact that it has. And the question for, us in the West is stuff like, how much are we prepared to take, and what kind of sacrifices is the West prepared to make in order to, for example, wean itself off Russian energy supply? Rapidly reducing that reliance on the cheapest energy that is available comes at a cost. Ethical foreign policy comes at a cost. And I think for years, the UK, the EU, the USA have perhaps got a little bit too comfortable with the idea that you could simultaneously get, for example, energy or anything else at the cheapest available price on the global market, and then simultaneously go out and say, well, here's the way that countries should act, and here's the kind of foreign policy that we want, an ethical foreign policy that we want to promote to other people. The reality is, and we see it really clearly in Russia, is that those two things are simply incompatible. The government, and you're finding this particularly in Europe and Germany, for example, cannot on one hand say we need to condemn the actions of Russia and Ukraine and simultaneously be funding that Russian war machine by maintaining reliance on Russian energy. And by removing yourself from the cheapest energy available, that comes at a cost, and that cost, unless it's mitigated by a government, hits consumers, and it hits the lowest paid, and it hits the people who spend the highest proportion of their income on stuff like energy, gas, electricity, petrol. So, this is going to be the long-running challenge for the West. And it's interesting because you sort of see in the package that you played immediately prior already these questions of, luxury goods and why are we banning luxury goods going to Russia. And I have a lot of sympathy for business owners, for example, who are seeing their businesses being impacted by the fact that their access to the Russian market is being restricted. But this is the reality of trying to have an ethical foreign policy, which is reducing overall an economy's reliance and integration on the Russian economy, for example, and the cost of that will hit individual businesses. And these are the sacrifices that countries have to make if they want to have an ethical foreign policy. I suppose the question for us in the West is, for how long are people going to put up with that before, and maybe I'm being tragically, they start to think, oh, well, my bills are really high. Actually, I'm maybe going to encourage the government to get back onto that cheap Russian energy. That's the big question for everyday consumers in the West.
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer as well, isn't it, Thomas? All right, let's see if we can make ourselves smile before we get to the top of the hour by looking at the front page of the Star. Janelle, you've picked that out. The actor Brian Blessed. Let's bring it up so our viewers can see what the front page of the Star looks like on this Easter Monday. Strife of Brian, and a picture of Brian Blessed with his big face as the eye, the top of the dots on the eye and the Brian. Janelle, what is Brian Blessed up to? He's laying into MPs, isn't he?
He is laying into them in a strong way. He says that 99% of MPs, they want to be film stars, they want publicity, they're immature, they need to grow up. I mean, he really is going in on them, saying that they need mentors to succeed, they need to learn from people. And I do think he has a little bit of a point, especially around the publicity. It seems that people worry a lot about how they look rather than what they're actually doing. Before, MPs would have resigned over loads of things that have happened recently. There's no way they would have stayed on because they govern with consent. And when they lose people's confidence, they feel it's time to go. And I think he's kind of right that this government, I guess my question is for people like Boris and Rishi and all of these things that are happening, what are you really in this for? Because if it's to govern people and to govern them well and with their confidence, well, you seem to have lost that you don't want to go. So actually, I think he has a point that for a lot of them, this is a career. It's about publicity, about their post-public life and the money that they can earn. And so I think he does have some of a point. But I mean, he does go probably a bit stronger than I would go. But yeah, definitely laying into them.
Yeah, and a great pun as a headline as well on the front page of the Star. All right, let's just finish up then, Thomas, if we can. You picked out a story from the inside pages of the Eye that says that the Defence Secretary, Mr Ben Wallace, is now the favourite to succeed Boris Johnson as the stock in Rishi Sunak continues to tumble. What's all this about and who's done the polling?
Well, it's interesting, actually, because we were talking just earlier on about this question of support for Boris Johnson, whether it would continue into following a May election. You're likely to see a few more of these kind of polls asking voters the question, Conservative voters, the general public, if Boris Johnson were to go, who would you like to replace him? And it's interesting because, a premiership and a PM who's secure in their position wouldn't open the newspapers to see stories like this. So it's telling in itself that these are increasingly the kind of questions that pollsters are asking the general public about who they would like to see succeeding Boris Johnson. At the moment, Ben Wallace is at the top of that poll. The Defence Secretary obviously winning a lot of plaudits in terms of a fairly, a consistent beginning early on policy on Ukraine, a relatively untarnished record, certainly in comparison to many of his cabinet colleagues. Okay. In second place there is Liz Truss, but Rishi Sunak plummeting is part of that story. And, it's a lesson, isn't it? How quick does politics move? A month ago, he was the obvious choice. Yep. Now it's all up for grabs.
It certainly is. All right, Thomas, Janelle, thank you.